The champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor, sending crystalline fragments scattering like 1,000 broken promises. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance, where a man in a wrinkled suit stood trembling, his eyes wild with desperation. Seraphina Valdez felt the blood drain from her face as she recognized those eyes, eyes that had once whispered lies against her skin, eyes that had watched her collapse to her knees in an empty apartment, begging him not to leave. Dominic Hale had the audacity to crash her engagement party. "Sarah, please," he choked out, stumbling forward. "I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I should never have left you. I should never have chosen her. Please, you have to give me another chance." But before Seraphina could respond, a warm hand settled protectively against the small of her back. Caspian Thorne, one of the most powerful men in the country, stepped forward, his presence commanding the entire room. His jaw was set like granite, but his voice remained dangerously soft. "I believe my fiancée has already given you her answer," Caspian said, each word dripping with controlled fury. "She gave it when she survived everything you put her through. She gave it when she rebuilt herself from the ashes of your betrayal. And she's giving it now, standing beside me, wearing my ring." Seraphina looked down at the stunning sapphire that adorned her finger, a ring worth more than she had ever dreamed of owning. But it wasn't the money that made her heart swell. It was the man. It was the journey. It was the woman she had become when she finally stopped begging for crumbs of love and demanded the whole feast. How did she get here? How did she go from crying on a cold bathroom floor to standing in a penthouse ballroom, flanked by the most eligible bachelor in the nation? Let me take you back to the beginning. Now, before we continue this story, I need you to do something for me. Drop a comment right now telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story is reaching. And while you're at it, hit that subscribe button because you're going to want to be here for every twist and turn that's coming. Trust me, this story is about to take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't forget. Seraphina Valdez was 26 years old when her world fell apart. She had built her entire existence around one man, Dominic Hale, a marketing executive with a smile that could charm the devil himself and a tongue dripping with honeyed lies. They had been together for 5 years. 5 years of her paying half the rent on an apartment she couldn't afford. 5 years of her cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, attending his work functions as the perfect, supportive girlfriend. 5 years of her turning down job opportunities in other cities because he claimed he couldn't live without her. She had loved him with the reckless abandon of someone who believed love was enough. She had loved him through the late nights when he came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, excusing it as client dinners. She had loved him through the credit card debt he accumulated in her name, promising he would pay it back when his big promotion came through. She had loved him through his wandering eyes and his dismissive comments about her dreams of becoming an interior designer. "You're not creative enough for that, babe," he would say, patting her head like she was a child. "Just focus on your little administrative job. It's stable. It's safe. It's you." And she had believed him. God help her. She had believed every word. The night he left started like any other. Seraphina had made his favorite meal, roast lamb with rosemary potatoes. She had set the table with candles, wearing the red dress he had bought her 2 birthdays ago, the one that was slightly too small but that he insisted looked sexy when it hugged her figure. She had been planning to surprise him with news. She had finally worked up the courage to apply for an interior design internship at a prestigious firm downtown. Against all odds, they had called her in for an interview. She was going to chase her dream. She was going to make something of herself. And she was certain Dominic would be proud of her. But when the door opened at 8:30, Dominic didn't smile at the candles or the meal or the dress. His face was pale and drawn, and he couldn't meet her eyes. "We need to talk," he said. Those 4 words. Those 4 terrible, world-ending words. Seraphina's heart began to pound. What's wrong? Is it work? Did something happen? Dominic sighed heavily and sat down at the table, ignoring the carefully arranged meal. "I've been thinking about us, about where this is going, and I don't think we want the same things anymore." What do you mean? Her voice came out as a whisper. We've been together for 5 years. We have plans. We talked about getting married, about buying a house. That's just it, Sarah. He finally looked at her, and she saw something cold in his eyes. Something final. I don't want those things. Not with you. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. I don't understand. Is there someone else? The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Her name is Vivian, he finally admitted. Vivian Castellan. She's the daughter of our company's biggest client. We've been seeing each other for 6 months. 6 months. 6 months, while he slept beside her, kissed her goodbye every morning, let her wash his clothes and cook his meals. 6 months of lies, stacked upon lies. She comes from a different world, Sarah. A world of connections and opportunities. Her father is going to make me a partner if I marry her.
Can't you see?
This is my chance. This is my future. And what about my future? Seraphina's voice cracked. What about everything I gave up for you? The job in Portland, the apartment I wanted, the dreams you told me were foolish. Dominic stood up, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of guilt cross his features. But it was gone just as quickly. You'll be fine, he said dismissively. You're a survivor, Sarah. That's what I always liked about you. You'll land on your feet. I need you to leave by morning, he continued, already walking toward the bedroom. Vivian is moving in next week. I'll box up your things. Seraphina stood frozen in that candlelit dining room, surrounded by food that would go uneaten, wearing a dress that suddenly felt like a costume from a play that had just ended. Everything she had built, everything she had sacrificed, everything she had tolerated, it all amounted to this. Being discarded like an old coat that no longer fit the image he wanted to project. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the couch, staring at the walls of the apartment she had helped decorate, the kitchen she had organized, the life she had curated. All of it belonged to him on paper. She had been so trusting, so naive, that she had never insisted on putting her name on anything. By 6 a.m, she had packed 2 suitcases with everything she owned. It wasn't much. It was embarrassingly little for 5 years of devoted partnership. Some clothes. Some books. A jewelry box that held only costume pieces. A laptop held together with hope and prayers. She left her keys on the table and walked out into the cold October morning with no destination in mind. Seraphina found herself at a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of bitter coffee and trying to figure out how her life had unraveled so completely. She had $62 in her checking account and 3 maxed-out credit cards in her name, all run up by Dominic. She had no family to call. Her parents had passed in a car accident when she was 19, and she was an only child. Her friends had slowly drifted away over the years, casualties of Dominic's subtle isolation tactics. She was completely, utterly alone. The tears came then, silent and steady, streaming down her cheeks and dripping into her coffee. She didn't even have the energy to wipe them away. What was the point? Who was watching? Who cared? As if to answer her question, a napkin appeared on the table beside her cup. It looks like you need this more than I do, said a deep, quiet voice. Seraphina looked up through blurred eyes to find a man standing beside her booth. He was tall, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His suit probably cost more than her annual salary, but there was nothing arrogant in his expression. Only genuine concern. I'm sorry, she managed to say, hastily dabbing at her face.
Fine.
I'm having a rough morning. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. Would you like some company? Sometimes rough mornings are easier with someone to share them.
She should have said no.
Every instinct she had developed during 5 years with Dominic screamed at her to refuse, to push this stranger away. But something in his voice, something kind and genuine and achingly sincere, made her gesture to the seat across from her. I'm Caspin, he said, sliding into the booth. And you look like someone who has a story to tell. I'm Seraphina, she replied, her voice hollow. And I don't think you want to hear my story. It's pathetic. Caspian signaled the waitress for 2 fresh coffees. I find that the people who call themselves pathetic are usually the bravest ones. It takes courage to be vulnerable, to feel things deeply enough that they can break you. She stared at this strange, elegant man in the middle of a rundown diner, speaking words that felt like bandages against her wounded soul.
Who are you? She asked.
Caspian smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed his serious features into something almost boyish. Right now, I'm just a man who happened to be craving terrible diner coffee at 6 in the morning. And I'm someone who believes that sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be at exactly the right moment. Seraphina didn't know it then, but her life was about to change forever. That morning in the diner, Seraphina talked for 2 hours straight. She told this stranger, this mysteriously kind man who seemed genuinely interested in her words, everything. About Dominic. About the betrayal. About the 5 years she had wasted believing she was loved when she was merely being used. About the dreams she had abandoned, the self-worth she had surrendered, the woman she had lost somewhere along the way. Caspian listened without interruption, without judgment, without any of the pitying expressions she had grown to expect from people who heard tales of heartbreak. He simply listened, his storm-gray eyes never leaving her face, his attention unwavering. When she finally finished, she felt oddly lighter, as if speaking the truth aloud had released some of the poison that had been building in her veins. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly mortified. "I just dumped my entire life story on a complete stranger. You probably have somewhere to be." "Nowhere more important than here," Caspian said quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek business card, sliding it across the table. "I know this might seem strange, but I'd like to help you." Seraphina looked down at the card. The embossed letters read, Thorn Enterprises. Beneath that, Caspian Thorn, Chief Executive Officer. Her breath caught. Even she, removed as she was from the world of business and finance, recognized that name. Thorn Enterprises was a global conglomerate with fingers in everything from technology to real estate to renewable energy. Caspian Thorn was regularly featured in magazines as one of the youngest billionaires in the country, known for his reclusive nature and his philanthropic endeavors. And he was sitting across from her in a dingy diner, drinking cheap coffee. You're Caspian Thorn," she stammered. "The Caspian Thorn." He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I prefer to just be Caspian if that's all right. Titles and wealth, they create barriers between people. And barriers were the last thing I wanted this morning." "Why?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "Why are you here? Why are you talking to me?" Caspian was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his words carefully. "Because 12 years ago, I was exactly where you are now.
Lost. Betrayed.
Convinced that my life was over because someone I trusted had destroyed everything I believed in. And someone reached out a hand to me when I needed it most. I've been looking for ways to repay that kindness ever since." He gestured to the business card. "On the back, there's a phone number for Human Resources Department. We have an opening for a design coordinator in our interior architecture division. It's entry-level, but it comes with a living wage, health benefits, and opportunities for advancement. If you're interested, I can put in a good word." Seraphina stared at him, waiting for the catch. There was always a catch. Men didn't just offer things without expecting something in return. She had learned that lesson with Dominic. As if reading her thoughts, Caspian stood and placed a $100 bill on the table for the coffees, an absurd tip that made the waitress's eyes go wide. "I'm not offering this because I want something from you, Seraphina," he said gently. "I'm offering it because I believe in second chances. And third chances. And as many chances as it takes to find your footing again." He paused at the edge of the booth. "Whatever you decide, I hope you know that what happened to you wasn't your fault. And the way you feel right now, worthless, discarded, invisible, that's not reality. That's just the lens of pain distorting your view." And then he was gone, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the lingering warmth of words that felt like they had been spoken directly to her soul. For 3 days, Seraphina stared at that business card. She had found a cheap motel room to stay in, paying by the night with the small amount of cash she could scrape together from odd jobs posted on community boards, helping an elderly neighbor move boxes, walking dogs for a stressed-out family, organizing inventory at a local boutique. She didn't want to call. She didn't want to accept help from anyone, especially not from a billionaire who was probably just indulging in some kind of rich person charity project. Her pride, what little remained of it, rebelled at the thought. But on the fourth morning, when she woke up shivering because the motel's heating had broken down again, when she looked at her reflection in the grimy bathroom mirror and barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman staring back at her, something shifted. Dominic had taken so much from her. Her time, her energy, her confidence, her dreams. Was she really going to let him take her future too? She called the number on the back of the card. The interview was scheduled for that Friday. Seraphina spent her last $40 on a second-hand blazer from a thrift shop and a pair of shoes that didn't have visible scuffs. She practiced answers to potential questions in front of the motel mirror, trying to remember the ambitious young woman she had been before Dominic convinced her she was nothing special. The offices of Thorne Enterprises occupied the top 20 floors of the most impressive skyscraper in the city. Seraphina felt impossibly small as she walked through the gleaming lobby, surrounded by people in elegant suits who moved with purpose and confidence. These were people who belonged here. People who had never been abandoned in the middle of the night by men who claimed to love them. But she kept walking. She kept breathing. She kept putting one foot in front of the other. The interview was with a woman named Eleonora, the director of the Interior Architecture Division. She was sharp and efficient, with silver hair cropped close to her head and eyes that missed nothing. Seraphina expected skepticism, expected to be dismissed as unqualified and inexperienced. Instead, Eleonora looked at the small portfolio Seraphina had frantically assembled, sketches from years ago, design concepts she had developed in her spare time, photos of rooms she had helped arrange for friends, and raised an elegant eyebrow. "You have an eye," Eleonora said simply. "Raw, untrained, but genuine. Most people in this industry are taught what to see. They copy trends and regurgitate styles. You actually see things. That's rare." Seraphina didn't know what to say. No one had ever praised her work before. Dominic had always called her sketches cute, in a way that clearly meant worthless. "I understand you're the one Caspian recommended personally," Eleonora continued, studying her with renewed interest. "He's never done that before. Not in all the years I've worked with him. You must have made quite an impression." I talked to him," Seraphina said honestly. "I told him about my situation. I think he felt sorry for me." Eleonora laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. "Caspian Thorne doesn't do pity hires.
He's too strategic for that.
If he recommended you, it's because he sees something. My job is to figure out what." The interview lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, Seraphina had somehow been offered a position as a junior design coordinator with a salary that was more than double what she had earned at her previous administrative job. She had a start date. She had a path forward. She walked out of the Thorne Enterprises building feeling like she was dreaming. The city looked different suddenly, brighter, more welcoming, full of possibilities she had forgotten existed. Over the following months, Seraphina threw herself into her new role with a determination that surprised even herself. She arrived early and stayed late. She absorbed every piece of feedback, every critique, every opportunity to learn. She discovered that she was genuinely talented, that the creative instincts Dominic had mocked were actually valuable, even remarkable. She didn't see Caspian during those first weeks. His office was on the executive floor, a world away from the design department. She told herself it didn't matter, that she didn't think about him, that she was focused entirely on rebuilding her life. But sometimes, in quiet moments, she found herself wondering about the man who had appeared at her lowest point and handed her a lifeline without asking for anything in return. Now, let me pause here and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone showed you unexpected kindness at a moment when you needed it most? A stranger, a friend, even a random encounter that changed everything? Drop your story in the comments below. I want to hear about the moments that restored your faith in humanity. And while you're thinking about it, if you're enjoying this story, make sure you've subscribed because we're only getting started and the twists ahead are going to leave you speechless. The first time Seraphina saw Caspian again was at a company gala 3 months after she started. Thorne Enterprises was celebrating a major acquisition and all employees were invited. She had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple emerald dress she had found at a vintage shop. Nothing compared to the designer gowns surrounding her, but it made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't felt in years. She was standing by the refreshment table, awkwardly trying to look like she belonged, when she felt someone approach. "You look different," Caspian said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. Lighter, like someone who's starting to remember who they are. Seraphina turned to face him, her heart doing a strange little flutter that she firmly ignored. "You look the same, like someone who belongs in a magazine spread." He laughed, a genuine, surprised sound that made several nearby heads turn in curiosity. Apparently, Caspian Thorne was not known for laughing. "I hear you're doing exceptionally well," he said, offering her one of the glasses. "Eleonora speaks very highly of you. Apparently, your design concepts for the Waverly Hotel renovation have impressed the entire team." "You've been keeping tabs on me?" she asked, surprised. Something flickered in his eyes, something warm and complicated that she couldn't quite name. "I've been interested in your progress. I believed you had potential that morning in the diner. It's gratifying to see that I was right." They talked for an hour that night. About work, about design, about life philosophies and favorite books, and the healing power of terrible diner coffee. Seraphina found herself laughing more than she had in years, found herself speaking freely and openly in a way she had forgotten she could. When the gala ended and Caspian walked her to a waiting car, insisting she not take the subway home at midnight, he paused before closing the door. "Would you have dinner with me sometime?" he asked. Not as a CEO and an employee, just as Caspian and Seraphina. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Why?" He smiled, that rare, genuine smile. "Because you're the first person in a very long time who has seen me as just Caspian. And I find myself not wanting to let that go." She should have been cautious. She should have remembered that trust led to pain, that love led to destruction. But looking into those storm-gray eyes, she felt something she hadn't felt since before Dominic. Hope. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." She had no idea that back in a penthouse across town, Dominic Hale was already beginning to feel the first tremors of karma, and the nightmare of his own making was just about to begin. Their first real date was not at a fancy restaurant or an exclusive club, despite the fact that Caspian could have easily secured a table at any establishment in the city with a single phone call. Instead, he took her to the botanical gardens on a crisp Saturday morning, armed with 2 cups of the terrible diner coffee that had somehow become symbolic of their connection. Seraphina laughed when she saw the cups. "Did you really go back to that diner?" "I've become somewhat of a regular," Caspian admitted with a sheepish grin. "The waitress, Maribel, now saves me a seat at the counter whenever I come in. She's convinced I'm going through some kind of rich person crisis and need the humbling experience of their burnt coffee." They walked through paths lined with autumn flowers, talking about everything and nothing. Caspian told her about his childhood, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, determined that her son would have opportunities she never had. He spoke of scholarship programs and library books, and the fierce hunger to prove himself that had driven him from poverty to prosperity. "People assume I was born into this," he said, gesturing vaguely to indicate his current status. "They see the suits and the company, and they think it's all inherited privilege. They don't know about the years of 18-hour workdays, the sacrifices, the loneliness." "The loneliness?" Seraphina asked gently. Caspian was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening. "When you have money, everyone wants something from you. Investors want access. Employees want favor. Women want security. I've become very good at identifying when someone sees Caspian and when they see Caspian Thorne, CEO. They're 2 different things to most people. Which one am I talking to right now?" He turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his eyes, something that seemed entirely at odds with his powerful public persona. You're talking to the man who still remembers what it feels like to count pennies for groceries. The man who calls his mother every Sunday and brings her flowers every month. The man who has never been very good at trusting people because every time he did, it was used against him. Seraphina understood that feeling more than he could know. "Someone hurt you," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Caspian nodded slowly. Her name was Natasha. We were together for 3 years, during the early days of building the company. I thought she loved me. I thought she was the one. He laughed bitterly. Turned out she was feeding information to a competing company. Everything I shared with her, every vulnerability, every strategic plan, she sold it all. When I finally discovered the truth, she didn't even have the decency to apologize. Just said it was business. Nothing personal. That's horrible, Seraphina breathed. It taught me an important lesson about the difference between what people say and what they actually mean. I've been cautious ever since. Guarded. He met her eyes directly. Until that morning in the diner. There was something about you, Seraphina. Something genuine. I couldn't look away. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Seraphina had experienced. Caspian courted her with an old-fashioned dedication that seemed almost anachronistic in the modern world. He sent flowers to her desk, not expensive arrangements, but single stems of her favorite blossoms because he had bothered to learn what she loved. He called her every evening just to hear about her day. He showed up at her apartment with takeout and bad movies, perfectly content to spend hours on her secondhand couch instead of at exclusive venues. And he never, ever pushed for anything physical. When their hands brushed, when their eyes met across a room, there was an undeniable electricity between them, but Caspian seemed determined to let their relationship build naturally, brick by brick, trust by trust. It was so different from Dominic, who had pursued her with aggressive intensity, rushing her into intimacy before she was ready, always making her feel like she owed him something for his attention. "Why are you so patient with me?" she asked one evening, as they sat on her tiny balcony watching the city lights flicker. "Because you're worth waiting for," Caspian replied simply. "And because I know what it's like to rebuild after someone tears you down. You don't rush healing. You don't force growth. You just create the conditions for it to happen, and then you step back and have faith." 6 months into their relationship, Seraphina had transformed in ways she never thought possible. Her career was flourishing, she had been promoted twice, and was now leading her own design team. Her confidence had returned, stronger than before. She had friends again, genuine connections with colleagues who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. And she was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with Caspian Thorne. But happiness, she had learned, has a way of attracting shadows. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an invitation. Seraphina's phone buzzed one afternoon with a text from an unknown number. "We should talk."
About Caspian.
"About what you don't know. Meet me at the cafe on 5th Street tomorrow at noon.
VC.
VC Vivian Castellan." The woman Dominic had left her for. Every instinct screamed at her to delete the message, to ignore it, to refuse to give Vivian any power over her new life. But curiosity and a lingering need for closure pulled at her. She went to the meeting. Vivian was exactly what Seraphina had imagined, polished, elegant, with a kind of effortless beauty that came from a lifetime of wealth and privilege. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves, and her manicured nails tapped impatiently against a cup of expensive tea. "You actually came," Vivian said, sounding surprised. "I thought you'd be too intimidated." Seraphina slid into the seat across from her, fighting to keep her expression neutral. "What do you want, Vivian?" "To warn you." Vivian's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Caspian Thorne is not who you think he is. He's using you, just like he uses everyone. Did you know he investigates every woman he dates? Has files on them? Photographs, financial records, background checks, the full surveillance package." A cold tendril of doubt snaked through Seraphina's chest. "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Ask him about the Valdez file. Ask him what he knew about you before that morning in the diner. See if his answer satisfies you." Vivian leaned closer, her perfume cloying. Dominic told me about you, you know. How naive you were. How easy to manipulate. Looks like you've just traded one puppet master for another. Why are you telling me this? Seraphina demanded. What's in it for you? Something flickered in Vivian's eyes, something that looked almost like pain. Because Dominic left me. 3 weeks ago. Turned out the Castellan family business is failing, and now that I'm not useful to his career ambitions, he found someone else. Someone younger. Someone with better connections. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? He used the same playbook on me that he used on you. Seraphina stared at the woman who had stolen her life, and instead of anger, she felt only pity. They were both casualties of the same charming predator. I'm sorry that happened to you, Seraphina said quietly. But whatever game you're playing with these accusations about Caspian, I'm not interested. She stood to leave, but Vivian's next words stopped her cold. The Valdez file, Seraphina. It exists. I've seen it. Ask yourself how a billionaire CEO just happened to be in a rundown diner at 6 in the morning, exactly when you needed someone most. Coincidences like that don't happen in real life. Seraphina walked out without responding, but the doubt had been planted. It grew roots in the quiet moments, spreading tendrils of suspicion through memories she had treasured. Had their meeting truly been chance? Had Caspian's kindness been organic or calculated? She needed answers. That night, instead of meeting Caspian for their usual dinner, she went to his penthouse unannounced. His housekeeper let her in, mentioning that Caspian was in his study. Seraphina walked through the immaculate apartment, past priceless artwork and perfectly arranged furniture, until she reached the door of his private office. It was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Caspian sitting at his desk, reading through a file. And even from a distance, she could make out the label on the folder, Valdez S. Her heart stopped. She pushed the door open fully, and Caspian looked up, his expression shifting from concentration to surprise to something that looked terrifyingly like guilt. Seraphina, he said, standing quickly. I didn't know you were coming. Is everything? What is that? She pointed at the folder, her voice trembling. What is that file, Caspian? He followed her gaze, and for a long moment, he was silent. The silence was damning. Sit down, he finally said, his voice heavy. I'll explain everything. The next hour was the most difficult of Seraphina's new life. She sat across from Caspian in his elegant study, watching as he laid out the contents of the Valdez file, documents, photographs, financial records, employment history. Everything about her, compiled into a neat dossier. Dominic Hale came onto my radar 8 months ago, Caspian began, his voice measured and careful. His firm was trying to partner with one of my subsidiaries on a marketing campaign. During the vetting process, my team uncovered some concerning patterns. Financial irregularities, complaints from former colleagues, and evidence of a personal life that suggested a predatory nature. Seraphina listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I started investigating him more closely, partly for business reasons, partly because there's something about men like him that I despise on a personal level. They remind me of every obstacle I fought against on my way up. Every person who tried to take advantage, to manipulate, to use others as stepping stones. He paused, running a hand through his hair. That's when I found you. The girlfriend he had been with for 5 years. The woman who had no idea she was being systematically exploited and isolated. I watched from a distance as he ran up dead in your name, as he sabotaged your career ambitions, as he prepared to discard you for a more advantageous match. You knew, Seraphina whispered. You knew everything before we ever met. Caspian nodded, shame written across his features. I convinced myself I was gathering intelligence. But the truth is, I became invested. I found myself reading your old design school applications, your rejected portfolios, your social media posts from before Dominic systematically removed them. I saw who you were before he broke you down. And you what? I started to care. He met her eyes directly, willing her to see his sincerity. The morning in the diner wasn't an accident. I knew he was going to leave you that night. I tracked his movements, saw him book a hotel room for himself and Vivian. I positioned myself to be there when you needed someone. Seraphina felt like the floor had been ripped from beneath her feet all over again. Everything she had believed about their connection, the magic of chance, the poetry of strangers meeting at the perfect moment, it was all manufactured.
Controlled.
Another man pulling her strings. How is this any different from what Dominic did? She asked, her voice cracking. He manipulated me for years. And now you're telling me our entire relationship started with manipulation too. It's different because I never used you, Caspian said urgently, moving toward her. Everything I did was meant to help you, not exploit you. The job offer was real, based on your actual talent. My feelings for you are real. They grew from watching you rebuild yourself, from every genuine conversation we've shared. I know I went about this wrong. I know I should have been honest from the beginning. But I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid you'd react exactly like this. Afraid you'd leave before you could see that my intentions were good, even if my methods were flawed. His voice broke slightly. I've spent my whole life building walls, Seraphina, protecting myself from people who only saw me as a means to an end. But with you, for the first time in years, I wanted to let someone in. I just didn't know how to do it honestly. I didn't know how to trust that you would want me, just me, without the grand gestures and the carefully orchestrated moments. Seraphina stood abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the city lights that suddenly seemed cold and distant. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger at being deceived, understanding of his wounded logic, fear that nothing in her life would ever be uncomplicated, and beneath it all, an aching recognition that she still loved him, even now, even knowing all of this. I need time, she finally said, not turning around. I need to think. I can't just process this tonight. I understand. Caspian's voice was thick with emotion. Take all the time you need. I'll be here, however long it takes. She walked out of his penthouse without looking back, and the weight of his gaze followed her all the way to the elevator. For 2 weeks, Seraphina threw herself into work and avoided Caspian's calls. He respected her boundaries, sending only occasional texts that said simple things like, thinking of you, or, I'm here when you're ready. No pressure.
No demands.
Just steady, patient presence at a distance. During those 2 weeks, she did something she had never done before. She sought therapy. A counselor named Odeline, who specialized in trauma and relationship recovery, who helped her untangle the complex web of her emotions. It sounds like you're dealing with 2 separate questions, Odeline observed during their 3rd session. The first is whether Caspian's actions constitute manipulation or care. The second is whether you can build a healthy relationship with someone whose approach to connection starts from a place of control, even well-intentioned control. How do I answer those questions? Seraphina asked. By examining outcomes rather than just methods. Dominic's manipulation was designed to diminish you, to trap you, to serve his interests at the expense of yours. What were the outcomes of Caspian's interference? Seraphina considered this carefully. The job that had transformed her career. The confidence she had rebuilt. The healing she had experienced. The growth that had allowed her to become a version of herself she was actually proud of. The outcomes were positive, she admitted, even if the starting point was problematic. Odeline nodded thoughtfully. That doesn't excuse deception. But it does suggest a fundamental difference in intent. The question becomes, can Caspian learn to relate to you without the crutch of control? Can he trust you with honesty from now on? And can you trust him to do so? When Seraphina finally called Caspian, 3 weeks after walking out of his penthouse, her voice was calm but guarded. I have conditions, she said without preamble. Anything. His response was immediate. No more surveillance. No more background checks. No more manufactured coincidences. From this moment on, whatever we are to each other has to be built on genuine transparency. If you can't trust me with the truth, then we have nothing. I can do that, he said, and she heard the rawness in his voice. I will do that. Seraphina, There's one more thing. She hesitated, then pressed forward.
Dominic.
You said you investigated him. You must have found evidence of what he did. The debt he put in my name. The financial exploitation. The systematic isolation. I did. I want to use it. Not for revenge. Not for cruelty. But for justice. He shouldn't get to destroy people and walk away unscathed. A long pause. Then Caspin spoke, and there was something almost admiring in his tone. I was hoping you'd say that. The reckoning for Dominic Hale began slowly, then accelerated like an avalanche. Anonymous tips to financial regulatory agencies revealed his pattern of fraud. Former colleagues, emboldened by sudden public scrutiny, came forward with their own stories of exploitation and manipulation. The Castellan family, already reeling from Vivian's public humiliation, suddenly wanted nothing to do with him. Within 3 months, Dominic had been terminated from his company, faced with multiple civil lawsuits, and become a pariah in the business world he had schemed so desperately to ascend. The charming smile that had once opened doors now opened only closed ones. Seraphina didn't orchestrate any of this directly. She simply gave Caspin permission to stop protecting the man who had destroyed 5 years of her life. And karma, held at bay for so long, came rushing in to collect its due. But her focus wasn't on Dominic anymore. Her focus was on healing, on building, on allowing herself to love again, cautiously, carefully, but genuinely. On a quiet evening 6 months after their reconciliation, Caspian took her back to the same botanical gardens where they had their first real date. The autumn flowers had given way to winter blooms, delicate and resilient against the cold. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "But before I give it to you, I need to say something." Seraphina's heart hammered as she watched him produce a small velvet box. "I know I started this relationship all wrong," Caspian continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I have a lifetime of trust to earn. But I also know, with absolute certainty, that I want to spend that lifetime earning it. You've made me a better person, Seraphina. You've taught me that love isn't about control. It's about courage. It's about vulnerability. It's about choosing someone again and again, every single day." He opened the box to reveal a stunning sapphire ring, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the winter light. "Will you marry me? Not because of what I can offer you materially, but because of who we are together. Because of the future we can build if we keep choosing honesty over fear." Seraphina looked at the ring, then at the man kneeling before her. A man who had started as a stranger in a diner and become the love she never thought she deserved. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." And as he slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into an embrace, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones without complications. They're the ones where two imperfect people choose to grow together, scars and all. But their story wasn't over yet. Because somewhere across town, Dominic Hale was watching news coverage of Caspian Thorne's engagement to an up-and-coming interior designer, and his desperation was reaching a dangerous new height. The engagement was announced in every major publication. Headlines proclaimed it the love story of the year. Reclusive billionaire CEO finally opens his heart to a talented designer with a remarkable underdog story. Journalists dug into Seraphina's background, her humble origins, her years in an abusive relationship, her triumphant reinvention. She became an overnight symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt trapped by circumstance. Seraphina adjusted to her new public life with surprising grace. She continued working at Thorne Enterprises, insisting on earning her way rather than riding on her fiancé's coattails. Her design team completed several high-profile projects, and industry magazines began featuring her work independently of her connection to Caspian. "I told you that you were talented," Caspian said one evening, flipping through a trade publication that featured her latest project on the cover. "You just needed someone to believe in you long enough for you to believe in yourself." "You've been annoyingly right about a lot of things," she admitted with a smile. Their wedding was planned for early spring, a celebration that would blend Caspian's wealth with Seraphina's taste for understated elegance. The guest list was deliberately intimate: close friends, trusted colleagues, Caspian's mother, who had wept with joy when she met Seraphina.
No spectacle.
No public extravaganza. Just two people committing to each other in the most honest way they knew how. But Dominic Hale had other plans. The first warning sign came 3 weeks before the wedding. Seraphina received an email from an anonymous account, photographs of herself and Caspian at various private moments, clearly taken with a telephoto lens. A message accompanied the images. I know everything. I have proof. If you don't want your fairy tale destroyed, meet me at the old warehouse on Pier 7. Alone. Seraphina's first instinct was to tell Caspian, but something about the message suggested that doing so would escalate whatever was coming. Against her better judgment, she went to the meeting. Dominic was waiting in the shadows of the abandoned warehouse, his once polished appearance now disheveled and desperate. The tailored suits had been replaced by wrinkled clothes. His charming smile had become something feral. "Hello, Sarah," he said, and her name on his lips made her skin crawl. "You've done well for yourself. Trading up, I see. From a marketing executive to a billionaire CEO. You always were more calculating than you let on." "What do you want, Dominic?" He stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. "I want what was taken from me. My career. My reputation. My future. Do you know what your boyfriend did to me? The investigations, the leaked information, the systematic destruction of everything I built." "You destroyed yourself," Seraphina said coldly. "Caspian just made sure people knew the truth." "The truth?" Dominic laughed bitterly. "The truth is that I was this close to having everything. The Castellan partnership. The promotion. The life I deserved. And then you had to go and catch the attention of a man with enough resources to burn my world to the ground. Is that why you're here? To blame me for your consequences?" Dominic's expression shifted to something more calculating. "I'm here to negotiate. You see, I still have connections. People who would pay handsomely for certain information about Thorn Enterprises. Internal documents. Strategic plans. Personal vulnerabilities." He held up a flash drive. "All of it is right here. I was going to sell it to the highest bidder. But then I thought, why not give my old girlfriend a chance to buy it first?" Seraphina stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the hollowness at his core. This was a man who had never loved anything or anyone except himself. Every relationship was a transaction. Every person was a resource to be exploited. "How much?" she asked, playing along. $10 million. Transferred to an offshore account. And you make sure those investigations stop. You give me my life back." Seraphina tilted her head, studying the man who had once been her entire world. "You know what I've learned in the past year, Dominic? I've learned that the people who hurt us only have power if we let them. I spent 5 years giving you my power. I'm not doing it again." She pulled out her phone, and Dominic's eyes widened as he realized she had been recording the entire conversation. "You wouldn't," he snarled. "I already have. This conversation, your blackmail attempt, your admission of corporate espionage, it's all documented. And, unlike you, I actually have people who will help me use it." For a moment, Dominic looked like he might lunge at her. But then a door behind him slammed open, and Caspian strode into the warehouse, flanked by 2 security officers and a detective from the local police department. "Dominic Hale," the detective announced, "you're under arrest for extortion, corporate espionage, and stalking." As the officers moved to restrain him, Dominic's mask of control shattered completely. He screamed at Seraphina, hurling profanities and threats that echoed off the warehouse walls. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall, watching as the man who had once made her feel so small was reduced to handcuffs and Miranda rights. When the police car pulled away, Caspian wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it. "I faced him. I didn't break. I'm not the woman he left in that apartment anymore." "No," Caspian agreed, kissing the top of her head. "You're so much more." The wedding day arrived on a warm April morning, all cherry blossoms and soft sunlight. The venue was a restored greenhouse on the outskirts of the city, all glass walls and climbing roses, designed by Seraphina herself as a gift to their guests. Every detail reflected both their personalities, elegant but warm, expensive but personal. Seraphina stood before the mirror in her bridal suite, wearing a dress of ivory silk that made her feel like she was glowing from within. Her best friend Morel, who had reconnected with her during the healing process, fussed with the veil while fighting back tears. "I can't believe we're here," Morel whispered. "After everything. After all the nights, I wished I could have saved you from him." "You couldn't have saved me," Seraphina said gently. "I had to save myself. But I'm grateful you're here now." The ceremony was beautiful and brief, meaningful vows exchanged in voices thick with emotion, rings slipped onto fingers that trembled slightly with joy. When the officiant pronounced them married, and Caspian kissed her for the first time as her husband, the guests erupted in applause. But the most dramatic moment came during the reception. The ballroom was alive with laughter and music when the doors suddenly burst open and a disheveled figure stumbled inside. Seraphina's champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Dominic Hale had somehow made bail, and he had come to destroy what he couldn't have. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance, where Dominic stood trembling, his eyes wild with desperation. The tuxedo he wore was clearly borrowed or stolen, hanging awkwardly on a frame that had lost weight from stress and confinement. "Sarah, please," he choked out, stumbling forward. "I made a mistake. The biggest mistake of my life. I should never have left you. I should never have chosen her. Please, you have to give me another chance." The security team moved immediately, but Caspian raised a hand to pause them. He stepped forward, positioning himself protectively in front of Seraphina, his presence commanding the entire room. "I believe my wife has already given you her answer," Caspian said, each word dripping with controlled fury. "She gave it when she survived everything you put her through. She gave it when she rebuilt herself from the ashes of your betrayal. And she's giving it now, standing beside me, wearing my ring." Dominic's desperation shifted to rage. "You stole her from me. You with your money and your power. You manipulated everything. She was mine. I was never yours," Seraphina said, stepping around Caspian to face her former tormentor directly. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying across the silent ballroom. "I was a convenience to you, a utility, a warm body to cook your meals and pay your debts and make you look successful. But I was never yours. You never saw me. You never knew me. And you never loved me." She moved closer, until she was standing just feet from the man who had once been able to break her with a single word. "But I'm grateful to you, Dominic. Because without your cruelty, I might never have discovered my own strength. Without your betrayal, I might never have found a love that actually sees me as a person rather than a possession. So thank you. Thank you for being exactly terrible enough to force me into a better life." Dominic's face contorted with humiliation and fury. He lunged toward her, but Caspian was faster, stepping between them and catching Dominic's wrist in an iron grip. "Touch her," Caspian said quietly, "and I will dismantle everything you have left. Not because I'm threatened by you, but because she matters and you never understood that." The security team finally intervened, pulling Dominic back as police officers arrived to escort him out. He screamed the whole way, incoherent threats that echoed off the elegant walls before finally fading into distant sirens. In the aftermath, the ballroom was silent. Guests exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to proceed after such a dramatic interruption. Seraphina took a deep breath, then turned to face the gathered crowd with a serene smile. "Well," she said, her voice light but strong, "I think we can all agree that was the best entertainment of the evening. Now, shall we continue celebrating?" The laughter that erupted was cathartic, tension breaking into relief, shock transforming into renewed joy. The music started again. The dancing resumed. And the wedding of Caspian and Seraphina Thorne became legendary for reasons beyond the obvious drama. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Seraphina found herself standing on the balcony of the reception venue, looking out at the city lights. Caspian joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. "Free," she replied. "Completely, utterly free. He has no power over me anymore. None at all. You were magnificent in there, facing him like that. Seraphina leaned back against her husband's chest, savoring the warmth and safety of his embrace. A year ago, I would have crumbled. I would have let him reduce me to tears and uncertainty. But somewhere along the way, I remembered who I was before him, and I met someone who believed I could be even better. Caspian pressed a kiss to her temple. You did all the hard work yourself. I just provided resources. You provided belief. That's different. That's rarer. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge above the city's glow. What happens now? Seraphina finally asked. Now we go on our honeymoon. Then we come back and build a life together. A real life, with all its complications and challenges and moments of imperfect beauty. Caspian turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. I want boring dinners and movie nights and arguments about who forgot to buy milk. I want the mundane parts as much as the magnificent parts. Because with you, even the ordinary feels extraordinary. That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said. I'm learning. You're an excellent teacher. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise, one of thousands they would make to each other in the years ahead. The months that followed were everything Caspian had described and more. Seraphina's design career continued to flourish, eventually leading to her opening her own firm with Thorn Enterprises as her first major client. Caspian gradually learned to trust more openly, allowing her into the vulnerable spaces he had protected for so long. Dominic was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Seraphina didn't attend the sentencing. She had better things to do with her time. Vivian Castellan eventually reached out with an unexpected apology, admitting that her warnings at the cafe had been partly driven by jealousy and spite. To Seraphina's own surprise, she found herself offering forgiveness, not because Vivian deserved it, but because holding on to resentment felt like carrying unnecessary weight. On their first anniversary, Caspian took Seraphina back to the diner where they had first met. They sat in the same booth, drinking the same terrible coffee, surrounded by the same worn decor. You know, Seraphina said, laughing at the absurdity of it all, if someone had told me, that morning when I was crying into my cup, that I would end up married to a billionaire CEO, leading my own design firm, and happier than I'd ever been in my life, I would have called them absolutely insane. And if someone had told me, Caspian replied, that I would find the love of my life in a rundown diner and that she would teach me more about courage and authenticity than anyone I'd ever met, I would have been equally skeptical. Life is strange. Life is beautiful. He reached across the table to take her hand. At least mine is. Because of you. And as they sat there, two imperfect people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, Seraphina realized that the most powerful revenge against those who try to break you isn't destruction. It's flourishing. It's becoming so entirely, radiantly happy that their cruelty becomes nothing more than a distant memory, a dark chapter in a story that ends in light. The waitress, Maribel, who had grown fond of these strange, wealthy regulars who kept returning to her modest establishment, brought their check with a knowing smile. Same time next year? She asked. Caspian looked at Seraphina, his eyes full of love and promise. Same time every year, he confirmed. Forever. And they meant it. Now, I have to ask you something before we part ways. If you made it this far, if you stayed with Seraphina through her tears and her triumph, through her heartbreak and her healing, then this story meant something to you. It connected with something in your own experience, your own struggles, your own hopes for the future. Here's what I need you to do. Hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me, for yourself. So that you never miss another story like this one. So that you have a reminder in your feed that endings can be happy, that people can change, that love can be real and genuine and worth all the pain it takes to find it. And then share the story. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone. Share it with a friend who's going through their own Dominic, their own season of darkness. Share it because stories have power, the power to heal, to inspire, to remind us that even when we're crying in a diner at 6 a.m, the best chapter of our lives might be just beginning. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying. And remember, your story isn't over either. The best is still coming. I'll see you in the next one.